Still red. We're good. Red is go. Okay. All right. Okay. Do we have enough? Did I make enough copies? We have enough? Everyone has? Yeah? Okay. All right. All right, so let's learn. Okay. All right, so, this week's parsha, Parshas Yishlach, there's actually a mitzvah that's clear in this week's parsha. So I figured it would be appropriate to talk about it. It's when there's no mitzvah in the parsha, that's when I have to get a little bit creative. So over here, you have a clear mitzvah. So it says in Pasuk, as we know, Yaakov Avinu is traveling with his family away from Lavan and so on, and he's going towards Esav. And so it says in Pasuk, Vayivasa Yaakov Levada, Yaakov Avinu is alone. He finds himself alone. Vayavik Yishimai Arleis Shachar, and he has this wrestling match, as we know, with the Malach of Esav. Vayar Kilo Yachalai, says in Pasuk, the Malach of Esav saw that he wasn't able to overtake Yaakov, but Vayiga B'Kaf Yerechai, but he was able to injure Yaakov B'Kaf Yerechai by where the hip and the thigh meet. The take a Kaf Yerech Yaakov, and his leg became dislocated. B'Yav Kima, as they were struggling. And the pasuk goes on that Yaakov Avinu, despite the injury, still wins the battle. And the pasuk continues. The Yaakov Avinu goes on. V'Yisrach Le'Hashemesh, the sun miraculously rises early to heal Yaakov Avinu v'Utzalei Arechai, and that helps him with his injury. So this is where the pasuk says our mitzvah. Al kin lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael Gid HaNashe. That's the first marmakim. That's in Parshas V'Yishlach over here. Al kin, because of this story. So lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael Gid HaNashe. Because of this, the Jewish people do not eat the Gid HaNashe, the sciatic nerve, asher al kaf hayarech, which is on the joint of the thigh. Ad hayom hazeh, until this day. Because that's where Yaakov Avinu was injured in this battle. And so that's the prohibition. This is the Isser of eating a Gid HaNashe. Okay? Listen, it's one of those things, we don't usually think about avoiding a Gid HaNashe. It's not on our radar usually. But like everything else, when we investigate some of the halacha, and then we'll see the pnimius of it, like every other mitzvah, it's extremely relevant, and there's a lot of amazing things in this mitzvah. Okay, so this is one of those mitzvahs that most people don't have much background in. So we're not going to take anything for granted. We're going to start from ground zero, and so we'll go through in the Marmar Kamis. It looks like a lot, but it should go pretty quickly. And I say that before Moshe year that this is going to be a quick one. We'll see what happens. But we'll go through some of the basic halachas of Gid HaNashe, and then we'll see where it takes us. Okay. So we'll begin like this. In Marmukah number 2, in the headquarters of the halachas of Gid HaNashe, the prohibition of eating this gid, this sinew, on an animal. So the headquarters is a parak in Maseches Chulin. Okay, I think it's the 9th parak of Chulin. It's called parak Gid HaNashe, and so this is the opening Mishnah, or at least part of the Mishnah, in that parak. So it's in Chulin Peites Mid Beis. The Mishnah says like this: Gid HaNashe. This, I think it's called the sciatic nerve. So the Gid HaNashe of an animal, so the Mishnah tells us the basic rules. First of all, it's Noig Ba'aretz, U'B'chutz La'aretz. This prohibition exists everywhere. In Eretz Yisrael, in Chutz La'aretz, right? As we know, that only agricultural mitzvahs are dependent on the land. If it's not agricultural based, like what animals are kosher or whatever, that's everywhere. So Gid HaNashe applies everywhere. B'fnei Abayis, Shlo B'fnei Abayis. With the Beis HaMikdash, not Beis HaMikdash, doesn't matter. B'chulin U'Mekdashin. It applies to animals which are chulin, regular animals, or even a carbon. If a person brings a carbon and the section, the hind legs and so on, is eaten by the kayin or whatever the case may be, so he also has to avoid the Gid HaNashe. So it applies to all animals as well. The noig behema ubachaya, and it applies to both behemoths and chayas, domesticated animals, wild animals. Doesn't make, as long as kosher animals, the Gid HaNashe applies. The yerch shel yamin. Small. It applies to both feet as well, both legs of the animal, right and left. But it does not apply to birds. This is only an issue with animals, with large animals, but not birds. Now I'll give you again. I don't have and you're probably happy. I don't have, a Gid HaNashe to show you. So let's use a little bit of imagination. So if you imagine an animal, so the hind legs of an animal, so the way it works is that the joint that connects the top part of the leg, let's call it the thigh of the animal, with the foot of the animal. So the way it works is that the muscle that's connecting those two joints, the thigh and the leg, so that's called a kaf. It's called a kaf. The reason why it's called a kaf, that's what the pasuk was talking about. That you we don't eat the Gid HaNashe asher al kaf hayorech. The word kaf literally means like a palm, right, or a cup also, because the shape of the muscle that's connecting the thigh of the animal and the leg is like a cup shape. It's like a round shape, like the letter chaf, like a spoon type of thing. It has that shape to it. And so, since the pasuk describes the Isra of Gid HaNashe, which is this sinew asher al kaf hayorech, so says the Gemara, therefore it's only going to apply to an animal or to a species that the shape of that joint, that the muscle that connects the thigh and the leg, is going to be the shape of a cuff. That's going to be the shape of a spoon, some circular muscle that sort of surrounds the whole joint. And that's only true for behemoths and chayas. But chickens or fowl and birds don't have that. They don't have that muscle shape in the shape of a cuff or the shape of a spoon or a circular shape. They don't have that. And so because of that, Gid HaNashe does not apply to fowl. That's the Mishnah. So it applies to behemoths and chayas because they have the kaf hayorech, but not to birds. Okay, that's the halach. Okay, fine. So now just a little bit more details in terms of where the sinew is and what it looks like and so on. So it's good to know. So Marmukah number 3. This is Gemara in Chulin, Tzadi Aleph Amid Aleph. So now we've identified so far what animals it applies to, and it's connected to this fact that the muscular the muscle tissue that connects the thigh and the leg on an animal, it's a round shape. It's a round shape that sort of covers the entire joint. And if it fits that criteria, then it'll be an animal that has a kaf hayorech, and it'll be under the prohibition of Gid HaNashe in theory. So what is this gid? What is the sinew? Where is it? So it says something like this. Amar Rav Yehuda Mishmol. Rav Yehuda said name Mishmol. Shnei gidanein. There are really two sinews that go on that area. Pnimi. There's one sinew which is on the inside of the leg, right? So as you have a leg, there's the inside of the leg facing each other, and then there's the outer part of the leg facing outside. So says Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul, there's the inner sinew, which is pnimi, samach le'etzem, and this is the inner sinew is actually what the Gid HaNashe is. So you have, the way it works is as follows. The sinew, if you imagine an animal, and you get like a petting zoo, right? So if you imagine an animal, you've seen it before. So this sinew starts by the tail, okay? And it's sort of by the tailbone, that's where this sinew begins. That's where the Gid HaNashe starts. And it flows down next to the bone on the inside of the meat, by the bone, and it continues down all the way through the thigh, okay, and then it makes its way out to the joint where the thigh then connects to the leg, right? That joint that I mentioned is the kaf. So on top of that circular muscle tissue, that's where this sinew that's until now been covered over by the thigh makes its appearance. Okay, and then it continues on. So far, so good. You follow this. Then it continues on. It goes back into hiding, and it continues on to the rest of the leg. That's the inner, and that's this gid. That's the sinew. It's on the inside of the leg, and again, it starts from the tail, and it makes its way all the way down, basically to the bottom of the foot, and it makes its appearance though over that joint, that muscle, that kaf that's connecting the thigh with the leg. That's the inner. That's the Gid HaNashe. That's Aser. That is the Gid HaNashe. The Chayav and Olav, and that's the prohibition midaraisa of the Gid HaNashe. That inner sinew that again extends from the tailbone all the way to the bottom, although it's covered over the whole way down, except for that point where it makes its appearance over the joint connecting the thigh and the leg. Now, at the same time, says Shmuel, Chitzain. There's another sinew on the outside of the leg. But the sinew on the outside of the leg does not extend from the tail all the way down. It actually goes the other way. It goes horizontally. It connects and it somehow in some way it sort of only exists over that area of the kaf hayarech, in that area, and it's not on the inside by the bone. It's connecting horizontally, I guess, whatever, somehow connecting sort of the joints one to the other on the horizontal side of the kaf, horizontally on that kaf hayarech, on the outside. You follow? So there's like a cross shape in the animal. On the inside, there's a sinew that goes, top down. What's it called? Vertically. There you go. That's the word. So it goes in the inside of the animal's leg. There's a vertical sinew going from the tail all the way to the bottom. Again, making its appearance over the joint connecting the thigh and the leg. And on the outside of the animal, there's a horizontal sinew that only is over the joint area. That's only over the joint area. It said Shmuel, Chitzain Samach Labasar, that's that sinew that's on the outside, that's horizontal, that's only over the joint area, is Samach Labasar. It's sort of mixed up within the muscle tissue over that joint. Aser, that's also Aser. Ve'in Chayav L'Rav Ben Ol Midrabanan. So there's two Gid HaNashes. There's the Gid HaNashe Midaraisa, and that's the sinew, the vertical one on the inside, and then there's the Gid HaNashe that's Midrabanan, that's the horizontal one on the outside. Okay, that's the Gemara. The reason why we make this distinction, by the way, again, these are just the basic details of halacha, is because the pasuk says al kaf hayarech, that you shouldn't eat the Gid HaNashe al kaf hayarech. The word al kaf hayarech, the Gemara understands to mean that we're talking about a sinew that extends above and below the kaf hayarech. So the word al means on. In other words, not just over the muscle tissue, that's the joint, but a gid that starts above it and extends below it, and that's the inner gid, not the outer one, right? Because the outer one again is only over that area, and the inner one is what starts by the tail and extends all the way down. So the al kaf hayarech, the Gid HaNashe, that's al kaf hayarech, means a type of the sinew that has its origin point before that joint. That's how the Gemara interprets it. Okay. More than that. So now we've identified what the Gid HaNashe is. It's that inner sinew. Now, Maramaka number 4, the Gemara in Chulan at Tzadivav Amida Aleph gives us a little bit more detail in terms of what the prohibition is. So we've identified what sinew it is, but what part of the sinew is the prohibition? Says the Gemara Amar Shmuel, Loi Asra Torah Midaraisa, the only prohibition is Ela Sha'al HaKaf Bilvad. So even after we've identified that the inner, it's what the Gid HaNashe is, it's that inner sinew that goes from the tail all the way to the bottom of the animal, but says Shmuel, but the only part of that sinew that's a biblical prohibition is the only part of that sinew that's actually over the joint itself, that kaf area, the kaf hayarech, that, again, muscle tissue that's connecting the thigh to the leg, only over that area, the gid that's over that area, that's the one that's prohibited. So it's like an interesting thing. There is a gid that's only over that area. That's the one on the outside of the leg, right? But that's not the prohibition midaraisa. So the inner gid, which starts from the tail, gets to the bottom of the foot, that is the Gid HaNashe, but the only part that's prohibited is the part that's revealed, that's open, that's over the kaf part of the animal. That's the Gemara. So that's what Shmuel says. Again, Amar Shmuel, Loi Asra Torah, the biblical prohibition, even in that inner gid, is Ella Sha'al HaKaf Bilvad, is only the part of that sinew that's directly on top and over the kaf area. Shenemar al kaf hayarech. So the word al kaf hayarech that the pasuk uses to describe what the Gid HaNashe is tells us two things. It tells us what gid it's talking about. It's talking about a gid that has its origin before the kaf hayarech, before that muscle tissue, that the joint muscle. But nevertheless, even though you've identified the gid because of the fact that it starts earlier than the kaf hayarech, the only part that's prohibited is the part that's on the kaf hayarech. Okay, these are little technicalities. Now, that's all midaraisa, okay? But midrabanan, we say now, like midrabanan, Chazal were more machmer. Take a look at Maramaka number 5. Again, these are just the basic breakdown of the halachas. The Mishnah tells us in Chulun the following halacha. Hanoitel Gid HaNashe, if you are a butcher and you're taking care of an animal and you're trying to remove the Gid HaNashe, Tzarech sheyitel es kulei. Says the Mishnah, even though it's true that Shmuel is right, that biblically speaking, the only problem is the Gid HaNashe that's over the Kaf HaYarech, but midrabanan, you have to remove the entire Gid. From the beginning all the way to the end, you got to remove the whole thing. That's the opinion of the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says no. By mitzvahs all you got to do is just take off that particular spot, and you're good. You're good to go. So it's machlekes in the Mishnah. Again, everyone agrees to the basic principles. Midaraisa, what's the Gid HaNashe? The Gid itself is that inner sinew that runs from the tail to the bottom of the foot, but the part of it that's prohibited midaraisa is the only part that's over the kaf hayarech, that muscle tissue on the joint between the thigh and the leg. That's midaraisa. Midrabanan, says the Tanakama, but the whole thing you got to remove. Midrabanan, the whole thing is midrabanan a problem. It says Rabbi Yehuda, no, there's no such rabbinic prohibition. It's just that. Now, whenever you have a machlokes Tanakama and let's say Rabbi Yehuda in this case, so we usually go with the Tanakama, and so that's halacha l'maisa. That midaraisa, the Gid HaNashe, is only again that the part of the sinew that's over the kaf hayarech. Midrabanan, it's the whole thing. Now, what's interesting is the Gemara brings a story to, I guess, to bring home this point and to illustrate this point that midrabanan, the whole thing is prohibited. What's the story? And this we'll see when we get to the previous side of things. I think this story is significant. So in Marmukah number 6, the Gemara says as follows. It's on that Mishnah. It's all in Tzadi Vav in Chulin. The Gemara says, Bar Piuli, this was the name of a butcher. So Bar Piuli, Havakoi Kamei de Shmuel. The son of Piuli, this butcher, was in front of Shmuel. The Kamenater Itma, and he was deveining a thigh of an animal. In other words, he was taking out the Gid HaNashe, what's called Nikor. That's what's called in halacha. Nikor means to remove. So he's being menaker. He's removing the Gid HaNashe from this particular thigh. And what this Parpili was doing is that he was just taking off that particular section of the Gid. So he was using his knife and butchering tools to just take off that section of the Gid that was over the Kaf HaYarech. He's leaving though everything that's to the tail and everything below the thigh. So he's just taking off that part. And Shmuel seeing this. So I don't know if Shmuel was officially the Rav HaMachshir, but it happens to be he was noticing this. So Amrlei, so Shmuel says to him, Chavis Beitvei, you have to take off more. You got to take off the whole Gid, like we said, like the Mishnah says, Midrabanan, you have to take off the whole thing. Hashta, and Shmuel continued. He said, Hashta, loy chazisech. If I didn't see you doing this, if I wasn't here right now, safisali yisur, you would feed me treif. Right? I guess this Bar Piuli's meat was then going to be fed to Shmuel, whatever it is. So Shmuel's saying, like, Baruch Hashem, I caught this, because otherwise I'd be eating Gid HaNashe. So says the Gemara Irtis, that Bar Piuli butcher became so terrified of the thought that he would be feeding treif to Shmuel, Nafas Lakinim Yad, he became so terrified, he dropped the knife. So then Shmuel says, Shmuel says, but don't worry too much. The Ayrilach, because whoever taught you how to do this wasn't completely off base. That person that taught you was going with the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. So that's the story of the Gemara. Now, obviously, even with that being said, Shmuel still tells him, we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, we hold like the Tanakama, you got to remove the whole thing. Okay, it's an interesting anecdote that the Gemara is bringing. For what reason exactly? Unclear. I mean, even without this Gemara, we would know that you should pass like the Tanakama. That's classic rules in Mishnayos. Tanakama versus anyone, you go with the Tanakama. So, B'chlal, you don't really need this story. But and even now that we have this story, so it's an interesting thing. Shmuel's first, he didn't have to. All Shmuel had to say was, "You got to take care of the whole thing." But he went further than that. And he said, "And if I didn't see this, you'd be." So he's trying to scare him. But then he tries to back off the fear and says, "But don't worry, because it wasn't completely off base, because whoever told you to do like that was going with Rabbi Yehuda." So, a little bit mixed messages. Is he trying to give him fear, to make him calm down? Again, if it's just telling him what to do, that was the first thing he said, take care of the whole thing. Well, the whole thing is a little bit unnecessary to B'chlal. So I think when we get to the Pneumiya side of things, it might be a little bit more explained. Okay, so what we have so far, again, just to sum it up. Say it again? No, Rabbi, there's a Tana. This is Mistam much later. So again, yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe that was part of him just calming him down. On a simple level, he's just saying you're not violating Deraisa. Okay, it's a chumrah midrabanan from the Chachamim. Yeah, it's a strange thing. So what we have so far is that we have what the Gid HaNashe is midaraisa, and we have an extension midrabanan, right? So again, midaraisa, what's the Gid HaNashe? It's that inner sinew from the tail to the bottom of the foot. But midaraisa, the only problem is the part of the Gid HaNashe that's exposed over the kaf hayarech, over the joint of the between the thigh and the leg. That's the deraisa issue. Midrabanan, though, they asered the whole Gid HaNashe from top to bottom, and as well they asered the opposite, the gid that's on the outside of the leg, that doesn't go vertically from the top to the bottom, but goes horizontally straight through that muscle tissue, in that joint. So even though that's not the Gid HaNashe, midrabanan that's aser. So you have what's midraisa aser, and now you have what's midrabanan, and now we have something else as well. A very rare thing that the Gemara records a minig. Take a look at Marmakum number 7. Marmakum number 7, the Gemara says in Chulin again, Tzadi Aleph Amid Aleph, the Tanya, the Gemara records a brisa, Shmeinai, the fat that's over the gid. So again, the pasuk says you're not allowed to eat the gid. That's the sinew itself, but evidently, like what grows and develops over this sinew is fat. So says the brisa, Shmeinai mutter. It's completely mutter. Midraisa, it's mutter. It's not the Gid HaNashe, and midrabanan also. The Yisrael Kedoshim no go by Yisr. But Klal Yisrael that are Kedoshim, the minig was accepted not to eat even the fat that's connected to the Gid HaNashe. Okay, so this is what we have so far. Interesting enough, we have been hugging in Klal Yisrael, but for the Gemara to record a minig, it's relatively rare. It was only a handful of times. But Gid HaNashe, we have this example. More than that, the Rishonim, it's funny. The Rishonim make a point of this. The Ran, for example, in Chulin. The Rajba as well in Teres Habayis, a bunch of Rishonim make this point, and they say like it's a zach that by Gid HaNashe we have deraisa, we have derabanan, and we have minig. So midraisa we know what the Gid HaNashe is, midrabanan they extended it further, and now you have even a minig that the fat of the Gid HaNashe is also a problem. Okay, I think it's also a little bit of a funny thing. I mean, I'm not questioning the fact that we have minhagim, that's such a thing, but it's highlighted over here. It's like highlighted. By Gid HaNashe we have all these 3 different madregas. Okay, it needs explanation. Fine. So that's what the Gid HaNashe is, which animals it applies to, what it is midraisa, what it is midrabanan, what the minig is. Okay. Now one other halacha that we'll mention, and then we'll continue on to see where this takes us. Marmuk number 8. The Gemara says in Chulin on Tzadi Tesam Beis, there's a basic machlokes Tanoim, and then it becomes machlokes Amarayim. What is the Gid HaNashe? In other words, we've identified what it is. But the thing is like this, generally speaking, when the Torah gives us halachas of things that are treif and kosher, we're dealing with things that are edible. They're technically edible, right? Chazer is edible, right? The Torah says, despite the fact that it's edible, don't eat it, right? The thing with the Gid is a funny thing. Is the Gid something that you would have thought of as something that's edible or not? So on the one hand, so it's machlokes tanoim. Some tanoim say, yeah, the Gid is edible. It's a piece of meat. Maybe a little chewy, but it's a piece of meat. So it's no different than anything else which is technically edible. And the Torah says this is not kosher. Finished. If it's edible and the Torah says don't eat it, then it's under the regular rules of kashrus. Now we know one of the basic rules of kashrus, for example, is that if something's not kosher, not only is it not kosher, but the taste of it is also not kosher. So if you have something, let's say you have a piece of pork, right, and you cook it in a kosher pot, and even if you then take out the pork and throw it away, the pot is treif. Why? Because the taste of the pork made its way into the pot. So what? The Torah said you can't eat pork. The answer is tam k'ikr. The taste of something is like the object itself. But that's true if it has a taste and it's called food. Right? And it happens to be, it's treif food. But if you're dealing with something that doesn't have taste, right? If, let's say, for example, you literally, let's say you have a tree that was bowed down by Avodah Zarah. It's an Asherah tree, right? Okay, so it's Avodah Zarah. You're not allowed to have benefit from Avodah Zarah. So let's say I take the bark of that tree and I boil it in my kosher pot. So is there anything wrong with my pot? No. Why? This is not edible food, and it doesn't have taste to go into my pot. It's just a piece of wood. There's nothing. I can't have benefit from the wood itself, but the classic rules of tam ki'ikr, that the taste of something has the severity, has the halacha significance of the thing itself, that's a food halacha. It's a food halacha. So the question is, what is the Gid HaNashe? Is the Gid HaNashe food, just a little bit chewy? and then in that case it'll have the regular halachas of kashrus. If you roast a Gid HaNashe, then not only is the Gid HaNashe treif, but everything's treif because of it, because of the taste. Or no, eitz ba'almu. Says the Gemara, no, maybe the other possibility is that's pushing a piece of wood. This is not an edible thing. And in the regular rules of kashrus, we wouldn't have any issue with eating the Gid HaNashe because it's b'chalal not food. Eitzu, and the Torah answered it. Despite the fact that it's not food, the Torah said there's a piece. It's taka a piece of wood, but don't chew it and swallow it. Treat it like you're not allowed to eat it, but technically it's not really eating. And again, the difference would be is that if it's a piece of wood, technically, then it doesn't have taste, and it wouldn't trafe pots, and it wouldn't trafe any other meat that it's being cooked with. So what's the deal with a Gid HaNashe? So it's important to know: is this something that's edible, and despite and it became and the Torah said it's trafe, or is b'chalal not edible? The Torah said, despite the fact that it's not edible, don't eat it. In other words, does it have the rules of tam ki'ikr? Does it have a taste to give off to trafe up other things? That's the question. Say it again. If you hold, well, it's machlokes. If you hold that the Gid HaNashe is eitz ba'alma, that it's just basically a piece of wood, so to speak. I've never tasted the Gid HaNashe. No, so the fat of it. So the fat of it would definitely have a taste. The fat of it would definitely have a taste. The meat that it's connected to certainly has a taste. But if you just isolated the sinew itself, just the sinew itself, you just simply isolate the Gid HaNashe itself purely, so that the question is is that considered edible? Would that be considered edible or not? If without the Torah coming along, would that be considered edible? If it's not edible, then it doesn't halachically, it's not called food. The Torah says don't eat it. Okay, the Torah said don't eat this piece of wood. But it's not. But the thing itself is still not called food, and it wouldn't have the regular halachas of kashrus of trafing things up with its taste. It doesn't have. It's like again, it's no. The Torah said don't don't have any benefit from that tree. It doesn't have the regular rules of tam. It doesn't trafe things up. It doesn't have taste. So does the Gid HaNashe have taste or not? Huh? Dam is considered a food. Yeah, for sure. The world out there, there's drinking blood like this. Most places don't do, but cooking with it, yeah, for sure. There's not that I've ever had it, but there is definitely more exotic and adventurous cuisines that cook with blood for sure. So that's called food. So what do we hold? So Maraka number 8, the Gemara Paskin Sadi Tessim Meis Vehilchasa, Ein Begidim V'Noisim. The Gidim do not give off a taste. In other words, the way to think of the Gid HaNashe is that it's really not edible by itself. Again, there's other stuff connected to it that is, but it itself is not edible, despite the fact that it's not edible. Afal Pikein, the Torah said, don't eat it. Okay, fine. That's the halacha. Now again, all these things, when we get to the pneumiya side of things, it'll become a little bit, we'll see a little bit the soul of Torah emerging out of these halachas. But these are the basic halachas that we have. Okay, now, let's move on to another aspect of the Gid HaNashe, and from here we're going to transition to the pneumiya side of things. Marmakam number 9 is a Gemara Psachim. Okay, like I said, most of these halachas of Gid HaNashe are in Chulin, but there is a Gemara Psachim Chaf Beis Amid Aleph that also discusses Gid HaNashe, and an interesting halacha comes up. So it says like this: the Gemara Psachim Chaf Beis Amid Aleph, Gid HaNashe. The question is, the Gid HaNashe, is he definitely not allowed to eat it? The pasuk said, what is it? Alkein lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael Gid HaNashe. You're not allowed to eat the Gid HaNashe. The question is, whenever the Torah says don't eat, for the most part, it also means and also comes together with the prohibition of having benefit. So let's say, for example, chametz on Pesach. You're not allowed to eat chametz on Pesach, but you're also not allowed to have benefit. You know, have hana from chametz on Pesach. And for the most part, whenever you have something that's usher to eat, it usually carries with it a prohibition of benefit as well. So the question is by the Gid HaNashe. Is one allowed to have benefit from the Gid HaNashe? So for example, if I have a Gid HaNashe, the classic example of this would be, essentially the Mishnah's example of this is if I have a thigh of an animal, right, with the Gid HaNashe included, and I want to give it as a gift to a non-Jew. So would that be a problem? It's a problem giving a gift. But the answer is, by me giving him a gift, it means that now, he owes me something. And part of the gift that I gave him was a Gid HaNashe. So to a certain degree, I just had benefit from the Gid HaNashe. So does the Gid HaNashe, it's definitely usher to eat, are you also prohibited from having benefit from it? Is also bana. So says the Gemara like this: Gid HaNashe, it's machlokes. Gid HaNashe muter bahana divi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says the Gid HaNashe is permitted to have hana. It's only eating, but there's no problem with hana. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Oiser. Rabbi Shimon says no, it's aser. Hana is a problem. Okay. Whenever you have machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, the classic rule in halacha is with mishnayos that we go like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon, rarely do we paskin like in Shas. Rarely do we paskin like Rabbi Shimon. So in this case, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says it's mutter bahana, and Rabbi Shimon says aser. So classically, you would go with Rabbi Yehuda, and that's what most Rishonim say, that we go with Rabbi Yehuda. That's the halacha. But comes the Beis Yosef in Marmukah number 10, the Beis Yosef in Yeridea, Siman Samachay. That's where these halachas of Gid HaNashe are talked about. And he brings down this, it's machlokes again, whether it's mutter ba'ana or rasa ba'ana, Rabbi Yehuda versus Rabbi Shimon, and usually should go with Rabbi Yehuda, and that's the Rambam paskins, the Rif, and so on. Says Beis Yosef, miyu, the Sefer HaZoyer, Parshas V'Yishlach, but, says Beis Yosef, I found the Zohar Kaddish in Parshas V'Yishlach, Nira, over there it seems that the Zohar Kaddish says, Shagir Aser Ba'ana, that the Gid is Aser Ba'ana. That's what the Zohar Kaddish seems to say. V'lachin, Tagli Zohar, so if it's Kedai, you have to be mach, but the Zohar Kaddish says it's Aser Ba'ana. That's the Beis Yosef. Okay. Comes the Ramah in Darki Maisha and says, whoa, 1 second. Who wrote the Zohar Kaddish? Shimon, right? So what is Zohar Kaddish adding anything that we didn't already know? We have machlokes in Psachim. Rabbi Yehuda says it's Motor Bana. Rabbi Shimon says it's Aser Bana. Says the Beis Yosef, yeah, but the Zohar Kaddish says it's Aser Bana. So, but the Zohar is Rabbi Shimon. It's just Rabbi Shimon recording his own shita in a different sefer called the Zohar Kaddish. Why does that make it any more meaningful? Says the Darki Moshe, the Eini Mevin Devar. I don't chab what the Beis Yosef is talking about. Kishamati, I heard, and at this point it's very accepted. He says, I heard, Ki Bal Sefer Zayar, who stam Reb Shimon, Hamosker B'Talmud. What do you mean? The author of the Zohar Kaddish is Reb Shimon that we find in Chazal, Shu Rishim Bar Yochai. That's Rishim Bar Yochai. V'Hapol Gimei B'Talmud Shalonu, and we already know that this is Reb Shimon Shita in the Brisa in Psachim on Chav Beis Amud Aleph. That Rabbi Yehuda, that he's the one that disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda in that Brisa in Psachim. Matir Ba'ina, whereas Reb Shimon holds it's aser, Rabbi Yehuda permits it to have benefit from. For Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Allah Rabbi Yehuda. And we go with Rabbi Yehuda usually. Kamasha Kasu HaPoiskim. Ain't Raimi Sefer HaZoyer in Hilchos. What do you bring from the Zohar Kaddish? You're just bringing another place that Rabbi Shimon mentions his opinion. That doesn't. If the Zohar was written by Rav Gamliel, okay, so then you're telling me it's 2 against 1 now. It's Rav Shimon and Rav Gamliel against Rav Yehuda. Maybe whatever, but it's the same Rav Shimon. So what's the difference now that you found his opinion recorded in the Zohar Kaddish? It's the same Rav Shimon. It's still Rav Shimon against Rav Yehuda. Why would that sway anything? So Kainirly, that's what it seems to me, says the Ramah. I don't understand why the Zohar would make any difference. So the truth is, the question of the Ramah makes a lot of sense. I mean, what's the basis of talking about? It's not Rav Shimon. But it's more than that. Not only is the logic in this particular case difficult to understand, again, it's machlokes anyway between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Shimon, and you're proving that we should go like Rav Shimon because the Zohar says the same, that is Rav Shimon. So the whole thing is a pella. But b'chlal, we find other places by the Beis Yosef that the Beis Yosef did not take the Zohar Kaddish any more seriously in halacha to sway at all a decision that we would make just based on Gemara. I'll give you an example. Take a look at Marmukah number 12. So this is a Beis Yosef in Hilchos Tefillin. Okay, we're talking about Gid HaNashe, but in Hilchos Tefillin, so there's a machlokes Rishonim, and it's based on Gemaras. How much brachas you're supposed to make when you put on Tefillin? Okay, how many brachas are you supposed to make? So it's a big to do. Some Rishonim say to make 2 brachas, right? Laniach tefillin and on mitzvah tefillin, right? Some Rishonim say 1 bracha, just laniach tefillin. It's a big machlokes, and the Beis Yosef talks about, okay, so it's like anything else. You have machlokes, so you figure what to do. So there's different approaches how to figure it out, but whatever it is, we have the basic system in place of how to figure out halacha. Says the Beis Yosef like this. V'agar kasa. The Beis Yosef records from a late Rishon called the Agar. It's one of the Rishonim. And the Agar writes the following thing. V'ani mechaber mitzasi b'sefer HaZoyer. The Agar brings down that I found in the Sefer HaZoyer that the Zohar Kaddish says to make only 1 bracha on tefillin. And so the Agar, so that's what the Agar is talking about. The Agar brings down a machlokes, how much brachas to make. And at the end, the Agar says, but the Zohar Kaddish says to make 1 bracha. And therefore the Agar ends off, V'anita mahati al hani rav revi acholkan arashvi. So I don't understand how anyone could say no like the Zohar. Rishon Bar Yochai says to make one bracha. How could anyone think not like that? If they saw the Zohar, maybe they didn't see it. That's what the Augur says. Okay, this is all the Beis Yosef quoting the Augur. Now comes the Beis Yosef, and the Beis Yosef says, "Any day, lama tamal zeh." Why? What's the Augur problem? So the Zohar says it. So what? So what? Why? Lama tamal zeh Yosef mikamadinim. There's many halachas. Shemitzina shekasav Rashbi b'Sefer Zohar. Rishimon writes in the Sefer Zohar many halachas. Hepach maskana the Talmud, very often different than what the Gemara comes out with. They not paiskim kaisvin el maskana the Talmud, and we don't go with that. We go with what it says in the Gemara, and we halacha. We just isolate our minds and we think what it says in Shas and paiskim. Finished. The taima mishum dafilu im hayu yoydin divrashbi, and the reason is because even knowing what Rabbi Shimon says in the Zohar, we ignore what Rabbi Shimon says in the Zohar Kodesh in halacha if it contradicts a maskana that we would come up with just based on Gemara. So says the Beis Yosef, so the Augurs make a whole big deal. Rishimon says to make one bracha. So what? It's a nice Indian when learning Zohar Kodesh. Halach l'maisa, the Zohar Kodesh does not sway us at all. One second. So the same Beis Yosef in Ilchos Tefillin says, don't pay attention to the Zohar Kodesh at all when it comes to halacha. Comes to Gid HaNashe, not only is he saying the Zohar Kodesh is so chashuv, it's the same Rav Shimon. Just his opinion being recorded in the Zohar makes it so chashiv that it overrides the classic halacha of going like Rabbi Yehuda. So what's going on over here? Why is all of a sudden by Gid HaNashe like the Zohar Kodesh is like mamish? The same opinion recorded from a Mishnah, just recorded in the Zohar Kodesh now becomes like le'aver. What's going on over here? Okay. The truth is, it's nice if you think about it. It's a pelataka. You know, we find such a thing that, you know, I mentioned before, Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Shimon, so we go with Rabbi Yehuda, b'derech klal. It's taka pella, because in the Zohar Kodesh, we find this case. Rabbi Yehuda is mentioned in the Zohar Kodesh, and Rabbi Yehuda in the Zohar Kodesh is one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Shimon, and he's literally kissing the dust that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai walked on. So it's mamash pella. In the Zohar Kodesh, Rabbi Shimon is Beitzina Kadisha. He's the light of the 7 days of creation. Everyone is bottled to Rabbi Shimon. And the same Talmidim who are bottled to Rabbi Shimon in the Zohar Kodesh, in the Mishnayos disagree with him. Okay, listen, fine. You know, the Torah, you still have to say your opinion. And we don't pass him like Rabbi Shimon. How is there such a thing? You want to tell me that okay, we don't want to be so swayed by the Zohar Kodesh to always pass him like Rabbi Shimon. I get it. But that b'derech klal and halacha, we almost never pass him like Rabbi Shimon. Keseder, throughout Shas, we almost never pass him like Rabbi Shimon. There's always these rules in place to go against Rabbi Shimon. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, we go to Rabbi Yehuda. Like this, we go. Cannot never do pass like Rabbi Shimon. It's mamash pella. It is the same Rabbi Shimon as Zohar Kodesh, but Tzina Kedisha, but Tzina Denahara, and we don't pass like Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so something strange is going on over here. Okay, so let's go back to Gid HaNashe for a second. What's the pneumius of Gid HaNashe? What's the name of Gid HaNashe? Why is it? I don't ask the questions of why, but God forbid, what happens if a Jew eats the Gid HaNashe? So it's a violation, but like, what's the pneumius of the Isser? So if you take a look at Maramaka number 13, so there's a Zohar Kodesh, also Parshas Vayishlach. Let's read it together. Zohar Kodesh is like this. V'amai ikri Gid HaNashe. Why is it called the Gid HaNashe? Why is it called the Gid HaNashe? So it's interesting. Rashi in Chumash, for example, says the reason why it's called the word Gid HaNashe, the word Nashe, Rashi says, means to like move out of its proper place. So for example, in Hebrew, nashani means to forget. It's like a memory just got like jolted out of its place. So anything that's moved, dislocated, that's what the word Nashe means. So that's what's called Gid HaNashe, because that was the sinew that got dislocated with Yaakov Avinu's fight. Zohar Kodesh is a different reason. It's part of it. V'amai ikri Gid HaNashe. Why is it called Gid HaNashe? Kloimar. So the answer is Zohar Gid diumenashe levnei nashe mepulchana de merehain. This is the Gid HaNashe is a part of the body that's reflective. That's a reflection of the part of who we are as human beings that makes us forget about the Rebbeinu Shalom. In other words, we all have that weakest link. You know, it's like we have a godly soul and it's gavaldic, but at some point there's the Yetzer Hara too. Like we're like, how does that? Where does that happen? What gives space for the Yetzer Hara? What part of the Jewish person, physically, like spiritually speaking, allows place for there to be such a mitzias as us forgetting about the Rebbeinu Shalom? Where does such a thing come from? The answer is the Gid HaNashe. We know the Rebbeinu Shalom created us. We have our body; it parallels our soul. We have 613 parts of our body, and there's 613 parts of the soul that enliven the body. So don't think of the Gid HaNashe as just a body part. This is a body part that's reflective of some part of the soul. And so the weakest part of the soul that allows space for negative forces, for mamash the Yetzer Hara, is the part that enlivens the Gid HaNashe. That's what the Gid HaNashe is. It says the Zohar Kodesh. Says the Zohar Kodesh that Gid HaNashe l'vnei Nasha. It is the Gid that causes forgetfulness. Menashe comes from the word forgetfulness. The Menashe l'vnei Nasha that makes a person forget from serving their master. The Taman hu Yetzer Hara Ravia. That's where the Yetzer Hara is pouncing. That's what's waiting to pounce. That's the place. That's the weakest part of who the Jew is. Ubegin kach amra raisa, and because of this, the pasuk says, "Lo yochlu bnei Yisrael Gid HaNashe." Don't eat the Gid HaNashe. In other words, by eating the Gid HaNashe of an animal, what you're doing is strengthening that part of yourself, which is called the Gid HaNashe. And what is the Gid HaNashe in you? The part of you that has very, very dull spiritual sensitivity, very, very small consciousness, and the part of you that's extremely small and far from naturally being inclined to serve God. That's what allows taivas. All the Yetzer Hara is fueled by that. If a person had moichen de gadlus, had expanded consciousness, had a strong sensitivity to ruchnius, there'll be no space for Yetzer Hara, so to speak, in their life. But because there's such a thing that's called katnus, that smallness, that's the din, that's rigid, that's constricted, now there's a possibility of actually sinning and going against the Rebbeinu Shalom. That part of you, that part of us, that's a reflection of everything that's tiny and small within us. That's the Gid HaNashe. And so by eating a Gid HaNashe of an animal, it's strengthening that part of ourselves, which we don't want to be strengthened. That's the side. Now the Zohar Kodesh continues. The Isba Barnash Shasa Gidim. Now you should know that a person has 365 sinews, right? We know. And we know 365 sinews correspond to 365 lois essays, negative mitzvahs. And there's also 365 days. So it says as our Kodesh, we have this parallel now, right? Every particular sinew of the body is going to parallel a particular prohibition, which is also going to parallel a particular day of the year. Okay, so the Gid HaNashe, which is a sinew, is obviously going to parallel what prohibition? The Gid HaNashe, right? What day of the year is the Gid HaNashe of time? What day of the year is the smallest, tiniest, kadnus, the day that allows space for the enemies to come? It says as our Kodesh, Tisha B'Av Chad Min Hain. That's the day of Tisha B'Av. So within the 365 days of the year, Tisha B'Av corresponds to the Gid HaNashe. The Iyu L'Kabel Sam, because that's the day that is most receptive, unfortunately, to the enemy, to the Samach Ben, to the Satan. Ubegin Kach Amar Torah Lo Yochlu B'nei Yisrael Es Gid HaNashe. Says Zohar Kodesh amazing zach. That's why the Torah says don't eat the Gid HaNashe. It says don't eat Es HaGid HaNashe. What's Es is always the rabbis. Es is coming to add something. What is Es coming to add? Es, let's go Tisha B'Av. Comes to add Tisha B'Av. So it says Lo Yochlu B'nei Yisrael Es Gid HaNashe means don't eat the Gid HaNashe, but don't eat on a day that's Gid HaNashe dik. And that's the remez to not eat on Tisha B'Av. This is Zohar Kodesh. Okay. What does that do with Rishon Bar Yochai? So in the Sefer Yitzir, we're taught that every single Shevet corresponds to a particular month. So we know every month is also defined based on the most famous day of that month. So Tisha B'Av is Gid HaNashe. Tisha B'Av is Gid HaNashe. Tisha B'Av is the day of Katnas, din, constriction, small, tiny, leading to Averis, leading to all problems, leading to Golas. That's what Tisha B'Av is. And so all of the month of Av is defined by that day of Tisha B'Av, right? The 9 days start from Rosh Chodesh Av and so on. Who's the Shevet of the month of Av? Shimon. There's a Kabbalah that we have, Tzaddik records this, goes back to earlier Kadmanim as well, that Rishon Bar Yochai was a Gilgal of Shimon, from the Shevet Shimon. We find such a thing that the Shevet Shimon was taka predisposed to issues, to difficulties. For example, Shimon and Levi. Levi is a separate discussion, but Chazal say Shimon says to Levi, Baal Chalaymus, Yesvet Tzaddik. Shimon is the one who had an issue with Yesvet Tzaddik. He wanted to get rid of Yesvet Tzaddik. during the time of the Midbar. So the Nasi of Shevet Shimon, right, Zimri ben Solu, he has a relationship with a non-Jewish woman. 24,000 members of the Shevet Shimon die. Shimon has a difficult inyan. Shimon is the same words as Sham Avain. Over there is sin. And who is the Gilgal of Shimon? Shimon. This is in fact why in Nigla we don't paskin like Shimon. Just like we don't eat the Gid HaNashe, just like we don't want to be mechazik, that inyan of din, of kadness, of smallness, of strictness, of Sham Avain, we don't paskin like Shimon because of that. We don't want to pass like Rav Shimon. Pass like Rav Shimon means we're being kashir ourselves to that Indian. Rav Shimon means midas hadin. This is why even the famous Gemara of Rav Shimon pre-cave, the whole mice over there, right? There's him and he's having a discussion with Rabbi Yehuda, right, about the Romans. And Rabbi Yehuda says, "Oh, the Romans go to Makar Taiv, they do good things, bridges and so on. We're able to learn because of them." And Rav Shimon says, "No, you don't chap what the Romans are about." See, only Rav Shimon. The Gid HaNashe chaps the Yetzer Hara, you understand? Because that's the part of the person that allows the Samach Vem into your life. So it understands that. The higher levels of the Neshama doesn't even chap the whole sugi of the Yetzer Hara. Rabbi Yehuda is coming from a higher place. Rabbi Yehuda is Ches, Rabbi Yehuda is Meichen Negadlis, is Gula. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't chap what the Romans' motivation is. He can't. But Rabbi Shimon, Sham Avin, Rav Shimon is midas hadin. Rav Shimon is that smallness, that kadness. That's Gid HaNashe. It's Tisha B'av, the month of Av. That's why even the name Shimon, Svarim bring down, this is a big klal by the Arizal, that the word shmiya, the power of hearing versus vision, for example. Hearing is always very constricted. When you see something, you can see the whole picture all at once. But if you're hearing, you only hear piece by piece. Trei kali loy mishtam. You can't hear two things at the same time. The nature of hearing is that it's very constricted. Constriction means small, tiny. Whenever you have big, that's always an area that's not under, that doesn't allow the Yetzer Hara. Like I mentioned by Shal Shudas, Shirish, big, high, usually very few. That's not where the Yetzer Hara lives. The Yetzer Hara finds its way in pratim, details, this small, tiny. That's where the Yetzer Hara thrives. That's the thicket of pratim, that's where. So shmiya, the power of hearing, is very much associated with midas hadin. The irony of all ironies, though, is that same Rav Shimon, all of a sudden Zarka, there's Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, right? It's a different name, right? In the Gemara, there's a tradition we have that when he's called Rav Shimon, it's pre-cave. When he's called Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, it's post-cave. By adding that name of Bar Yochai, something changes, and not only does Rav Shimon then. Not only does then Rav Shimon not mean Gullus, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai means Gula. It says in Zohar Kodesh, everyone knows, by Lag Baimer, the Sifron Da, right? Eliot Moshe Rabbeinu said to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, the Sifron Da, with your sefer, the sefer Zohar, Yafkin Miglas Brachmi, we're going to get out of Gullus with Rachman. What's going on over here? Rav Shimon, the same Rav Shimon, who's midas hadin, we dafka don't pass like him because we don't want to associate ourselves with the tekifos, with the strength of midas hadin, the Gid HaNashe inyan, which is by Rav Shimon, and dafka all of a sudden the Zohar Kodesh becomes. The answer is a big klal in Pnimis HaTorah. And if you take a look at here, go to the bottom, Marmukah number 16. There's a line from the Maharal in Etzach Yisrael, Perak Yud Gimel. The Maharal says an amazing thing. He's going on a famous Gemara. The Gemara says a whole Maaseh, everyone knows. The Gemara says that Lasid Lavai, Hashem Yisbarach is going to go to Avram Avinu, and he says, Avram Avinu, Klal Yisrael sinned. Everyone's going to say, okay, what can I tell you? So get rid of him. He goes to Yaakov, and Yaakov says, right, get rid of him. So he goes to Yitzchak Avinu, and Yitzchak says, oh, my children sinned. By Nasav and Ishmael, they're your children. Sinning, they're my children. And he goes to defend us and makes the whole cheshbon taking care of our affairs. And it's ironic, it's Yitzchak Avinu. Says the Maharal, Kasher Yered Lo Eimek Hadin, Yesh Lo Meitzchos. Kasher Yered Lo Eimek Hadin, Yesh Lo Meitzchos. The secret is Geula. There's two ways for Geula to happen. One way for Geula to take place is that Taka, Klal Yisrael are small, tiny, running after small things, low places, Gid HaNashe dik, Tisha B'av dik. But Afal Pikein, V'hu Rachum, Yichaprav, and please just have Rachmanis and send us a Geula, despite the fact that we Taka are undeserving. That's not a Geula Shlema. That's not a Geula Shlema. That was what Pesach was. Right? Pesach was we were undeserving. Yeah, okay, a few mitzvahs undeserving. The Berachimim took us out, but guess what? It didn't last. right? There's a galus after galus and so on. We don't want a geula that just is chesed overwhelming midas hadin. We don't want that. What we want is a geula that is coming from such a deep place that it reveals that even within the katnus, even within the darkness and the Gid HaNashe quality of the Jew, within that, it's truthfully Male'ar. And despite the fact that a Jew is running towards bad things, what he's really running towards is the Rabbanu Shalom. This is the Giloi of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar Kodesh. The Zohar Kodesh is not just deeper ideas. Everything in the Zohar Kodesh is revealing one truth, one single truth, which is that all is God, and all that the Jewish person ever wants is God himself. That's summing up all Pnimis HaTorah. The Jew doesn't seem to want God. He seems to want Arayas and Shvichas Damim and Avodah Zarah. The answer is that he just doesn't know. He's looking for God. He just doesn't chat that God's not. That's not the place to look for him. But what he's looking for, what he's being attracted to, is Rabbanu Shalom. That's what all Pnimis HaTorah is about. So it's Dafka Reb Shimon. It's Dafka Reb Shimon who is going to be the one he needs to be the one to reveal the deepest secrets of Torah in order to be mamtik, in order to sweeten those judgments that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai that Reb Shimon is connected to. And this is why in the Zohar Kodesh we add Bar Yochai. We identify. See, a person can be identified. Who are you? Your name is Shimon. Okay, but where do you come from? Oh, I come from Yochai. I come from my father. When you give a father's name, the bar or ben something, it means that you're not just saying who the person is. You're giving his origin. And so by the name Shimon means katnus, smallness. It means midas hadin. It means Gid HaNashe. But when I say Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, what I'm saying is it's taka true there's smallness by the Jewish people, and there's a Tisha B'Av, and there's reasons why there's galus. But Bar Yochai means, but where does that really come from? Where does all the drive to do Averis come from? What's really motivating the Jew behind the scenes? You're not just identifying the person, you're identifying his origin, where he comes from ultimately. What's his deeper motivation? That's what the father always represents. The child represents the thing itself, the decision itself to run to this place. But the father means the chacham mind. It means like why? What's the deeper motivation? Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is the one that reveals the deep motivation behind every decision a Jew makes, good or bad. It has to be Reb Shimon. It has to be Reb Shimon. You couldn't have had some other Tana that represents all chesed, because then that's not a Gula Shleima. A Gula Shleima means Davka, the deepest light of all. You need the deepest light of all to reveal the unbelievable chesed and the unbelievable expansiveness that's actually contained in the smallest, katnus, darkest places in the Jew. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, so there's two different Reb Shimons. There's Reb Shimon in Nigla, which is just Reb Shimon. That's midas hadin. He represents smallness and everything that's wrong with a person. You don't pass like him. But Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar Kodesh is saying all that stuff that you thought was terrible that about the Jew in Nigla eyes, the Zohar Kodesh says it was all Male'ar. It's all full of light. It's all divine. And Adarabah, the ultimate tikkun for the Gid HaNashe is not just not to eat it. Here, let's go back. What was the Gid HaNashe? The Torah says don't eat the Gid HaNashe. Why? Because you don't want to have. We shouldn't fall into Averis. But there's always two approaches. There's always two prongs to that approach. There's one. Okay, so don't eat it. Masking. But that's not ultimately fixing the problem. The ultimate fixing of the problem is not just not to eat the Gid HaNashe. Because you might not, by not eating Gid HaNashe means you're not increasing the strength of your Gid HaNashe. You're not fixing it. How do you fix the Gid HaNashe? The ultimate purpose of this mitzvah is not just not to avoid bigger problems. Every mitzvah is there to fix something. So certainly part of fixing the Gid HaNashe is not to make the problem worse, not to compound it. So if you go to the doctor and then there's some sickness that you have, so there's two things the doctor has to tell you. First of all, he has to tell you certain things are going to make your problem worse, so don't do those things. But that's not enough. You also want to have an eitzah how to fix the problem. So when the Gid HaNashe, the mitzvah Gid HaNashe is about fixing the Gid HaNashe. But there's two parts to it. There's don't eat the Gid HaNashe, fine, and that means I'm not going to make the problem worse. But there's also, okay, but I need to be mesakim that katnus. The only way to be mesakim that katnus is by revealing what? The deepest light of all, which is the Zohar Kodesh himself. The same Reb Shimon, who's Tisha B'Av, who's Gid HaNashe, we don't pass like in Nigla, we dafka need to pass like him in the Zohar Kodesh. Because it's dafka in the Gid HaNashe sugya that we need the Zohar Kodesh to ultimately shed light on fixing the Gid HaNashe. So we had a problem, right? We had a kasha. Understand? Usually in halacha, tefillin v'chula, we don't pass like Reb Shimon. All of a sudden, the same opinion that's recorded by Reb Shimon in Mishnah is, but now it's recorded in the Zohar Kodesh. Oh, I go to the Zohar Kodesh. The answer is, there's something special about the Zohar Kodesh, particularly with the Gid HaNashe, because a mimer of Reb Shimon in the Zohar Kodesh is not just, okay, he happens to record his opinion in a different book. When it's recorded in the Zohar Kodesh, it means it's a revelation of that light that's so potent and so deep that it's able to make even the Gid HaNashe glow. Even that smallest part of a person is able to glow through the light of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And that's dafka the point of the Isra of Gid HaNashe. Not just not to eat it, but to be masak in that part of you. That's the Gid HaNashe. The only way to be masak in that part of you, that's the Gid HaNashe, is what? Is by shedding the deepest light upon it. That's the only way you can do that. Again, like the Maral says, Kashayir lo oimek hadin yishlu meitzchos. When you get to the oimek, the deepest part of things, that's where you're able to reveal light to the lowest places. So so in other words, the shleimus of the mitzvah of Gid HaNashe, in halacha, what's Gid HaNashe? Just avoid compounding the problem. Don't eat more Gid HaNashe. But that's never the full solution. The mitzvah is not just about not making the problem worse, it's about fixing the problem. So how do you fix the problem? Not by overwhelming it with chesed. That's a gul of Pesach. That doesn't fix the problem. To fix the problem means to reveal such a deep light that dafka, a light that's able to illuminate even the darkest of places. And therefore you dafka have Reb Shimon, who embodies the darkest of places, revealing that deepest light of the Zohar Kodesh. And therefore everything Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says in the Zohar Kodesh, particularly with Gid HaNashe, is most important. Even if it's the same halacha that he says in Shas, recording it in Zohar Kodesh makes it a whole different experience. And by paskening, by going with a psak of Reb Shimon in the Zohar Kodesh means that you're opening up that light of exaltedness that's able to illuminate even the lowest part of who you are, and that's exactly the point of the Gid HaNashe. That's exactly the point of this mitzvah, to be masak in that. Let's go back to some of the halachas. Remember that story with the butcher? It's like, what's going on? Shmuel, scaring him, not scaring him. The answer is that's exactly the whole sugya of Gid HaNashe. The whole sugya of Gid HaNashe is to have that sitter of like, whoa, there's a part of it that's talking very, very low, and there's a part of it that almost fed treif to Shmuel. But at the same time, the side of Gid HaNashe is, but there's a light that illuminates. There's a light that illuminates. And Shimon, so what does Shmuel do? He scares him. And he says, you should know what you're capable of on a bad day. But at the same time, you should know, even on a bad day, it wasn't so terrible. That itself is the side of Gid HaNashe. That's the ultimate secret of Gid HaNashe. You're talking capable of low things, but you should know even that part of it that's capable of low things, in Pnimius, is full of light. Is full of light. That's exactly the secret of Gid HaNashe. Let's go back as well. That's why all of the halachas, if you remember, on a deraisa level, was revolving around the kaf hayorich. Right? Okay, Stam, the Rebbeinu Shalom just shows this random, like, okay, a joint that looks like a chaf, that's like a circle, that's going to be the, what's the significance of that? There's a principle. When we started this series, I told you this from the Kamarna. There are 613 mitzvahs plus 7 midrabanan, like Chanukah, Natil Sitaim, and so on, altogether. 613 plus 7 is 620, equals Begamatria, the word keser. And there's exactly 620 letters in the Aseret Divros. And so the Kamarna has a mahalach that every single one of the mitzvahs parallels a particular letter of Aseret Divros. This is the third mitzvah, according to the Chinuch's calculation. And what is the third letter of Aseret Divros? The first word is Anaychi. The third letter is Aleph, is the first letter. Nun, Chaf. Aleph, Nun, Chaf. So the third letter, Chaf, is corresponding to the Gid HaNashe. So right away you have Chaf, Kaf HaYarech. But deeper than that, take a look at Marmukah number 14. This is the Oitzer Chaim, this is the Kamarna in Mitzvah Gimel. The Nirmaz Mitzvah Zayis b'chaf da'anaychi, right? Mitam kitam al kaf hayarech. So that's appropriate. The mitzvah is revolving around that part of the body that's called the kaf. Okay. Ube'emes tam hakaf l'soid hakaser. And you should know, the Kamarna says from the Zohar Kodesh we find this, that the letter chaf is also the first letter of the word keser, which means crown. Va'olov nemar, what does the crown mean? Crown in Kabbalah is always a term that corresponds and symbolizes the highest light, the deepest light, a light that transcends. And therefore said the Gemara, "V'lov nemar." When that light of Keser is revealed, what does the pasuk say? Ein elohim imadi. There's no other gods besides me. In other words, Elohim in this context means avodah zarah. There's no foreign gods. In other words, ki hu hakayfe umantik kol elokim kedoshim. This light of Keser has the ability to soften, to subdue, and to sweeten all Elokim. Umachris kol klipis. It cuts off all the klipis. The ein Elohim imadi da samech mevenachash. So in other words, said the Gemara, the Keser, when the deepest light of all is illuminates, then what happens? Then all of Eris fall to the wayside. Then a Yid is revealed to be Malik Kedusha. So Dafka the Gid HaNashe, and what is the Keser is connected, says Azar, with the first letter of the word Keser is Chaf. So Dafka the Gid HaNashe is revolving around the Chaf. Because that's the secret of Gid HaNashe, not just to avoid compounding the problem, but the pneumius of Gid HaNashe is to reveal the secrets of Torah in such a way that it illuminates everything. Even the Gid HaNashe becomes illuminated by the Chaf, by the Keser. And this is, if you take a look at Maramokah number 15, so this is from Likutei Moharan. Again, it's part of a completely different discussion. Rav Nachman in Simon Pei Beis, and Likutei Moharan says the following thing: Shahamalchus nikras hanikra dalid less lamerkum maklon. Okay. Malchus is not negea for us right now. But Rav Nachman says there's a part of the Jew which is mamish empty and low, and that's the Gid HaNashe that we're talking about, the lowest part of who we are. Reb Shimon in the Gemara, very low, very dark, and as a zark, and it says Rav Nachman that corresponds to the letter Daled. The letter Daled. The letter Dal comes from the word Dal, which means empty and impoverished, doesn't have anything of its own. Shvach opens doors for negative things. But V'Hakadosh Baruch Hu mamshich la. But in order to enliven the Dalit, in order to give life to the Gid HaNashe, the Rabban Shalom gives Chiyas Mechachma, from the highest place, from the highest level of Chachma, Hanikra Yud, which is a letter Yud. V'zeh Yud. And therefore, says Rav Nachman, this is the secret of the letter Yud. The letter Yud, if you spell it in full, as he does over here, is Yud Vav Dalit. The Vav means always connecting. Vav is a bridge. So Yud Vav Dalit means that the letter Yud, that Yud means the Rabban Shalom taking the letter Yud, which is the highest, and through the Vav, which is like the channel, bringing it all the way to the Dalet, illuminating the Dalet. V'zeh, and said Reb Nachman, this is the meaning of the pasuk: V'toshes alai kapecha, that Hashem, you've placed your hand upon me. Hainu Yud gematria chaf. Said Reb Nachman like this: Kapecha means your hand, but it also means chafecha, your chaf. Chaf, what's the gematria of chaf? Chaf is 20. That's the gematria Yud Vav Dalet. Right? In other words, if you take it again, Yud Vav Dalet is Vav Dalet are 6 and 4. That's 10. That's 20 altogether. Yud Vav Dalet is 20. So again, let's sum it up. Yud Vav Dalet represents what? The Rebbeinu Shem taking the highest level of wisdom, and Davka, the highest level of wisdom, the letter Yud, flowing all the way down to illuminate the lowest level, which is the letter Dalet. Instead of Nachman, Yud Vav Dalet equals B'matchir 20, and that's the letter Chaf in the Aleph base. Let's go back to Gid HaNashe. Gid HaNashe is all revolving around the Chaf, because that's exactly the secret of Gid HaNashe, to take Davka, the highest tires of the Zohar Kodesh, or Rishim Bar Yochai, and to Davka, because it's the highest places, to illuminate the lowest levels of Gid HaNashe, which is Tisha B'Av itself, and because of that, Yafkan Yisrael Min Gelusa Barachmi, and that's the secret of Gid HaNashe. No? So how do we fulfill the mitzvah of Gid HaNashe if we're not like being offered it? The answer is by opening up within ourselves and within Torah the deepest levels of light that we can possibly have, like Bez Hashem coming soon as Yotes Kis, that's the whole meaning of Chassidus and so on, Pnimis HaTorah. So by illuminating our lives with the deepest lights of Rav Shem Bar Yochai, those are the only lights capable of illuminating the lowest parts of who we are. And by illuminating the lowest parts of who we are, that itself is a kiyum. That's the point of the mitzvah of Gid HaNashe. So Aleph, it means not to increase smallness in our lives, but adarab, not just to avoid eating more Gid HaNashe, not just to avoid smallness, but to increase bigness, greatness. And when we have that expansiveness, then everything else is illuminated. Okay, we should be zeicha to have that light revealed in the Gula Shalem V'Amitis Me'er V'Imenu. Amen.